on the subject of carbon, one of the things that I discovered is that there's a whole universe of different types of auditors that are working with companies, large and small, including SMEs. And in particular, some of them operating in Belgium. This is one example, a company called CO2 Logic. They work with companies to reduce their carbon emissions. And within this bigger agenda of reducing emissions and dealing with the issue of climate change, of course, there is the issue of energy efficiency. So what's interesting is that these companies note that they have increasing demand from SMEs for their services. And all of these stories that we've been told that SMEs don't have the resources or the time or the interest to deal with issues such as energy efficiency are really not quite true. And they deserve another look, because many companies are interested in the climate, and their approach to it is through addressing and reducing their CO2 emissions. And among the actions that they have to take are actions that include switch to renewables, energy efficiency activities, resource efficiency activities, and also carbon sequestration. And this issue of carbon sequestration is very interesting. CO2 Logic in particular told me great stories about projects they carried out. Some of these involve planting trees in Madagascar. Some of them involve planting trees in Belgium. And so this, at first sight, it seems far away from the whole subject of energy efficiency. But as we'll see later on, it really is very close to the whole topic of the energy transition. And it's part of a series of things that we absolutely need to do. And probably it's an easier place for SMEs to start rather than more complex issues such as energy efficiency, building renovations, and all of the costly but necessary actions that they will one day have to take. Thanks. I mentioned this vast universe of auditors. On the subject of carbon, one of the organizations I came across which impressed me very much is called CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project. So this was initially aimed at big companies, but nowadays it also works on behalf of investors, cities, communities, etc. And we'll see later on, it has started to deal with company supply chains. 70 or 80% of the emissions of large companies are actually in their supply chains. And so what has happened so far is that the big companies that have signed up and made declarations in line with the agenda of the Carbon Disclosure Project, these companies have addressed what are called Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions up until recently. And in the language of CDP, Scope 1 and Scope 2 are emissions that a company can deal with directly on its own because it really has to do with the internal behavior of the company. And then there's something called Scope 3 emissions. We'll come back to that. But this organization, CDP, is really growing in strength. And again, it not only deals with small companies, but also cities and large companies as well, and the needs of investors. My clicker doesn't seem to work anymore. Thanks. So coming back to this issue of, where does, carbon sequestration fit into this picture? And is it really necessary to talk about this as part of a conversation about energy efficiency? And last year, there was a meeting of the International Energy Agency, and they showed a very interesting graph where they compared the way the world works already and goals such as sustainable development goals. And they look at the gap and they estimate what needs to be done to bridge this gap. And within that, just switching to renewable energy sources is not enough. We need to do energy efficiency work as well. And not only that, we also need to do other activities such as carbon capture and sequestration. So the point is that when we talk about energy efficiency, we're only talking about a partial solution to a bigger problem. This is the problem of managing climate change. And if we want to solve this problem, it's not enough just to do energy efficiency. We also have to deal with the switch to renewables, and we also have to consider carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And this is what's interesting about the work of auditors like CO2 Logic, is that they have attacked the problem of climate change on behalf of SMEs, but starting with the issue of carbon capture and storage. You measure your carbon footprint. There are things that are simple and easy to do that immediately allow you to reduce your emissions. And once you jump on the train, this train of dealing with the carbon issue, there's a whole range of other things that you can do as time allows and as you are ready for it. But certainly the carbon sequestration issue seems like a really good place to start. And the other thing is that it gives really great stories to tell your employees, your clients, your customers, etc., the communities in which you're embedded. Stories that are much more compelling and much more interesting than simply reporting that you made a saving of €1,000 a year on your cost of energy. So the International Energy Agency, they published a report this year called the World Energy Outlook. And it was just a few days ago when they launched this report. And they looked at two things. One is the impact of COVID on the situation, because with the impact on the global economy, energy use has fallen a lot. It's really been quite dramatic. But that doesn't save us. And the point that they wanted to make in this report is that progress is just not quickly enough. And the previous year, where they made this comparison between what we're doing now and the sustainable development goals, here they talk about, where we can go based on the commitments of national governments, where we need to be if we are to achieve what are called the sustainable development goals, and where we need to be if we're to achieve net zero in 2050, which is the ultimate goal of the European Union. And so you can see from this diagram, it's a little bit fuzzy, but you can see that there's a huge gap between the commitments made, the sustainable development goals, and what we need to do to achieve net zero. And the general message out of this meeting is that we need to do much more. We're not doing enough, and we're not doing it quickly enough. And among the things that we need to do is, again, 3 types of action. And they boil down to switching to renewables, improving your energy efficiency, and capturing carbon. They've worded it in a slightly different way this year, but ultimately it's the same argument except with greater urgency